Okay, welcome to El Maestro. My name is Victor Leche III, and you are with me. Thank you for joining me today on the 11th episode of this podcast. Today is July 6th, and I am so glad that you have joined us today. Let me go ahead and go through the regular items that I do at the top of every episode. Before I get into the content, I have a lot of content to give you, because it's been 2 weeks since I gave you a podcast. And I know that last week's podcast, which didn't happen, was supposed to be an interview. Our interviewee had to go ahead and reschedule. We are still going to go ahead and do that interview with Eric Smith. We're still trying to lock down a date, and when we lock it down, we will go ahead and give you the interview. So let me go ahead and give you the regular items that I always do before I get into the content. The first is where you can find me. You can find me on Facebook. My name is Victor Leche III. The last name is spelled Lecha. And I think I am the only Victor Leche III on Facebook. You can also interact with us on our Facebook page called El Maestro Podcast. In fact, you can use El Maestro Podcast to find us on TikTok, to find us on Instagram, and that's also where you will find the podcast as well, either on Spotify or on YouTube. Now, on Instagram and TikTok, it's just highlight reels, but that's a good way to listen to certain clips of the show. And if you're trying to introduce someone to the show and say, hey, I like El Maestro podcast, you should check it out. Check out El Maestro. They're like, I don't want to listen to a whole podcast. You can go ahead and just refer them or go ahead and point them to those pages, and then you go ahead and listen to the clips and decide if they want to get into the content. The other thing is that I suffer from ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I say it because sometimes in the podcast, I may have trouble remembering things that I want to bring into the podcast. I have trouble recollecting some of the content or information I want to give you. I may get things reversed as well. If that be the case, I will go ahead and correct it. Not during the show, or obviously not during the episode, but in the top of the next week's podcast, I have a segment called Corrections. And in Corrections, I go ahead and correct whatever I got wrong the previous week. So with that out of the way, I'll go ahead and start with corrections. I don't really have any corrections, except for one that's kind of lighthearted in nature. I had talked about how in not last week's podcast, 2 weeks ago, how my experience with raccoons had not been friendly. And I've been feeling like a lot of the cartoons and animation movies that we see have been trying to paint raccoons in a friendlier light. But my experience with raccoons had not been that way. I had seen them as real kind of vile, to be honest with you. And some people may get offended that I'm calling raccoons vile. I'm just giving you my experience. It was, you're going to have to listen to the podcast, episode 10. I talk about it. My experience with the raccoon was, it was intense. So, I talked about how I did not really see them as these friendly creatures as they're being portrayed in the movies. But I had forgotten about my favorite raccoon, or one of my favorite characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in the Marvel movies, and that's Rocket from Guardians of the Galaxy. So, I guess that wasn't entirely fair because I like Rocket. I wish we had a Rocket in real life, but we don't. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with my assessment in regards to raccoons until someone can show me a friendly raccoon. And with that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and get right into the news. And unfortunately, we're going to go on a down note. I know that might have brought a smile to your face. We do have some funny stories for our levity segment. I'm not going to go ahead and give them to you now, but, just to know that they involve another bee swarm. If you had listened to one of our previous podcasts, there was a truck that overturned and there was a bee swarm there because they were transporting beehives in this truck. Well, we have another bee swarm story to give you. Different this time, but still a swarm nonetheless. And a story of someone who won the lottery in a way that is like, come on, you didn't really win it that way. But it happened. So hopefully that piques your interest. But I'm going to go ahead and get right into the content. And unfortunately, what I have to bring up is, since I last spoke to you, which I'm sure you already know, the United States went ahead and entered the war between Israel and Iran and went ahead and bombed Iran. I have no other word to say this except for absolutely a horrible decision, poor judgment, and just absolutely just a really horrible, horrific, unwise decision. And I'm trying to think of, wars that are not so inflammatory, because I don't want to take the podcast to that level. But how else do you describe and define another president bypassing Congress when it's very clear in the Constitution that the only way a president can bring us into armed conflict or war is through congressional approval? And as I mentioned to you in another podcast, this is a pattern that is continuing in this modern era. I mean, we have to be really concerned here. This is a whole other point that I don't want to get into, but I'm going to bring it up in another podcast. The amount of power that's in the executive branch today would absolutely worry the founders, would absolutely worry the founding fathers of how much power the executive has today. The executive, and when I mean the executive, I mean the president. The president today can go ahead and issue executive orders. Now, don't get me wrong, that's part of the Constitution. But I don't think the founders expected it to be used in the way that it is. It's used today to bypass Congress. Any law that the president wants to pass just goes ahead and writes an executive order. Congress doesn't write Congress still passes legislation. But if Congress passes a law that the president doesn't like or won't pass any of his laws, he can just go ahead and do an executive order. Now can go ahead and bomb Iran if he wants to. Can take us to war. It's really concerning. Because the checks and balances that the founders wanted in the framework, in the development of the Constitution and the separation of power is not working today. We live under this illusion that there are checks and balances. If there wasn't a judicial system right now, this country would basically be would be labeled, it would be very close to being labeled an autocracy. Because the executive has so much power. The president has so much power. And Congress isn't using its ability, its power to go ahead and check the unbridled power right now going on in the executive. And it shows. I mean, it shows in that Donald Trump bombed Iran. I mean, this is a man who campaigned on ending wars, didn't see congressional approval, went ahead and bombed targeted nuclear sites. This is after, he went back on a promise, said, we're not going to follow Israel if they go ahead and attack Iran. Lie. He says he ends wars, lies again. And to tell, how divisive, how horrible, how bad was this decision by President Trump? The MAGA base was even in an uproar about it. I have a hard time understanding why we entered into this war. Iran already had told us, if you enter this, there's going to be irreparable damage. And I mean, the last time we entered a war in the Middle East was with Iraq, when, again, we had no business being there. And what happened when we went ahead and toppled the regime that was there? ISIS was formed. We've gone a long time. Some of us remember when this country wasn't as safe as it is now. And all Donald Trump did was make it more unsafe for no reason. Iran wasn't anywhere near developing a nuclear weapon. That is why Israel apparently begun its attack. Why Netanyahu said we need to go ahead and begin to bomb Iran. But they were at 60% uranium enrichment. And to be able to develop a nuclear bomb, you need to get to 90%. They were nowhere near that level. You would think the United States would attempt to go ahead and use diplomatic pressure, diplomatic channels, soft power, and end that war. No, instead, Donald Trump decides to join it and bomb nuclear sites after Iran gave a warning not to. And what did Iran do? Iran went ahead and bombed Qatar, an army base in Qatar. That was their response. And on top of that, Iran had threatened to unleash attacks by sleeper cells inside the United States if it was attacked. The president knew that. So why would he enter a war when there was no reason to be in that war? And the so-called reason for being in that war was because we don't want Iran to develop a nuclear weapon, which they've already said they're not using their uranium enrichment to develop a nuclear weapon. And it was nowhere near the level to develop a nuclear weapon, which would be at 90%. All you did was make us more unsafe. I have a hard time expressing everything I want to tell you in this segment because I find it just absolutely incredulous that we entered this. And I know I'm repeating myself, but I'm trying to reinforce to you how absolutely absurd it is that we entered this fray. Iran was nowhere near developing a nuclear weapon. Iran had threatened to use sleeper cells, in other words, terrorism, in our country if we attacked them. Iran, of course, threatened to attack us if we attacked them. I mean, even if somehow Donald Trump thought that Iran was close to building a nuclear weapon, which by no way they were. Israel was already attacking Iran. So why would you go ahead and enter? Now, they apparently targeted nuclear sites. And he said, what a great day it was. And we bombed this, and our payload and whatever, man. I can read you the tweet, but why bother? Thank you for your attention to this matter. I mean, can you think of anything else to sign your tweets with? Thank you for your attention to this matter. So he went ahead and they went ahead and bombed apparently, I don't know how many, say 3, 4, 5, it don't matter. But here's what does matter. He was touting it as this great victory, great success, great accomplishment, which, by the way, again, it would be if Iran had 90% uranium enrichment, but they don't. All you did was make us susceptible to potential terror attacks and then Qatar getting bombed. I mean, you joined Netanyahu, who, if it wasn't for Vladimir Putin, would be the most destabilizing force in the world right now. Bombing Lebanon. We're going to get to that. He bombed Lebanon again. Bombing Syria. The war in Gaza. Unwillingness to come to the peace table. Threatening to relocate Palestinians. We're going to get to how many Palestinians have died there. Bombing Iran. And you go ahead and join that loose cannon, showing how reckless you are as well. Unbelievable. So of course you tout it as a great success, except, because you have to, because you're hoping so, because you campaigned on ending wars. You said you wouldn't enter us into a war, so of course you have to make it look great. That's what happens when you're a zero-sum person. Everything is has to be super great. You gotta sell it, man. Art of the deal. This was the most fantastic operation ever. We went ahead and bombed Iran and stopped their nuclear capabilities, even though they were nowhere close. We're fantastic. Make America great again. Except, early U.S. intelligence assessment suggests strikes on Iran did not destroy the nuclear sites. And Iran apparently moved the enriched uranium before U.S. strikes to secret locations. Wonderful. Fantastic. Way to go, President Trump. All you did was make this country unsafe and open to reprisals. Thank the Lord. Thank the Lord Most High that the following day there was a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. And let me remind you, you didn't even want a ceasefire. You said unconditional surrender. I'm thinking you probably listened to the UAE there, or Saudi Arabia. What, you actually listen to people? Fantastic. Maybe you would have listened to them when they said how they all condemned Israel's attack on Iran, and you wouldn't have joined them. These countries who have ties with Israel under the leadership of Netanyahu really need to be thinking, as I mentioned to you in a previous podcast, about severing those diplomatic ties until they show that they actually want peace in the Middle East. And they're actually for a two-state solution and a Palestinian state. The other thing is that, and we'll get to this a little bit later, but Donald Trump came back from the Middle East, and I said in one of my podcasts, he had a great trip there in regards to securing military and business contracts with the United States, and with the United States doing those contracts with Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. Considering how the United States not only entered this fray in Iran, but are not putting enough diplomatic pressure on Netanyahu to come to end the war in Gaza and to cease bombing everyone in the Middle East. They seriously should consider other alternatives for those contracts as a way to provide diplomatic pressure, soft power. I'll tell you, there are European alternatives. In fact, we'll just go to it right now. We're already talking about it. There are European alternatives. These are huge contracts that the United States, that Trump was able to secure with Saudi, Qatar, and the UAE. 600 billion with Saudi, 1.2 trillion with Qatar, 200 billion with the UAE. And you know what? France, Germany, and the United Kingdom all have competitors who can go ahead and meet the terms of those contracts in regards to the business and military contracts that Trump secured. And they should. I don't know if they will. I don't know if those 6 Arab nations will go ahead and sever or at least suspend those diplomatic ties with Israel until Netanyahu is removed from power. They should too. That'd be another diplomatic way. Why the United States, why Donald Trump didn't seek to go ahead and to end that war between Israel and Iran using diplomatic means is beyond me. Instead, went ahead and bombed Iran. It goes to show what I feel is the title of this podcast today. Diplomacy is dying today in the world, people. It's dying. And I wrote this on my Facebook, I think a day after the United States entered that war between Israel and Iran. Diplomacy is dying. Today we have reckless, unpredictable, and wild leaders who look to the sword first to resolve their issues. And the leaders who can be trusted, who are wise, and who are faithful, simply speak condemnations and do nothing. Meanwhile, the blood of innocents and soldiers for these reckless leaders die, leaving behind sadness, grief, and trauma for their families and this world. My friends, the world is on fire, as I said to you in a previous podcast. Where is the diplomacy nowadays? Where is soft power? I don't know how difficult it is to go ahead and I need to speak from my own inexperience. I don't know how difficult it is to go ahead and to suspend diplomatic ties with a country. But I know it's possible. And I gave you the reasons as to why it would be legitimately possible. Because Israel, under Netanyahu's leadership, has broken the treaties that it has made with Egypt, Jordan, and the countries in the Abraham Accords. They could. Will they? I don't know. I hope so. I prayed for it. I've spoken about it. I've posted about it. Another thing could be, another diplomatic measure, a soft measure, would be Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar saying, we're going to go ahead and suspend the rest of these contracts, and we're going to look at European alternatives because of the instability that Israel is bringing to the region, and how you seem to be supporting Israel, how you are supporting Israel in creating this instability in our region. Now, I had ChatGPT write it up. It's fantastic. You can see it on my Facebook page. Incredible. And it was, written to the T, legally, beautifully. I'd read it to you, but it's a little boring. But if you're into that stuff, you can go to my Facebook page and read it. Fantastic. There isn't any diplomacy today. I shouldn't say there isn't any. Diplomacy is fading out. It's dying. And I don't know. I mean, we could go into this more with the, United Nations. I mean, great idea. I love the idea. But I mean, its core function has been to prevent conflict and wars. And it can't meet that primary objective with the way that it is constructed right now, with the way that it is functioning, with the way that it operates, the way that its structure. And, without what that means then, without some sort of world body to go ahead and maintain the peace, then you have to go ahead and rely on the individual leaders in each country. And when you end up having these reckless leaders in these countries, you end up having, many wars. I mean, in these 2 years, Gaza, this war in Iran, Israel and Pakistan, you could say, bombing in Lebanon, bombing in Syria, Ukraine. I know that wasn't been the last 2 years, it's been 3 years, but still. After World War II, we said never again. It rings hollow. Hollow now. Especially in this country when, the commander-in-chief can just go ahead and bypass Congress and send us to war in any country that he feels like it. In that post that I wrote in regards to, I'll read it again. Meanwhile, the blood of innocents and soldiers for these reckless leaders die, leaving behind sadness, grief, and trauma for their families and the world. And trauma for their families and this world. These reckless leaders, with their reckless actions, they stay protected as they make these reckless decisions. Whether it be in homes, mansions, estates. And meanwhile, as I just said to you, the blood of innocents are running over these grounds, over these lands. One such place, obviously, is in Gaza, where the Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, on June 26th, came out and accused Israel of a genocide in Gaza. He became the first most prominent European leader to describe the situation in Gaza as a genocide. And I have to go ahead and give kudos to the Spanish Prime Minister for being the first prominent leader in the West to go ahead and to label this a genocide, what's happening in Gaza. And I have to go ahead and agree with him. And it's taken me a lot longer than others to label it as a genocide. And you might say, what took you so long? And I want to say, you know what? I apologize. But I wanted to be sure that it did meet the criteria for a genocide before I labeled it a genocide on the country that has experienced the worst genocide the world had ever seen. And I'll be honest with you. I told you I always hold everyone accountable, even myself. Maybe that was my blind side. Maybe that was my bias. And I couldn't see it, but I see it now. And I'll give you how I came to that realization. First, it was the Spanish Prime Minister saying it. And I looked at it some more. Now, when I first went ahead and decided, does this meet what's happening here in Gaza doesn't meet the level of a genocide. I was in the United Kingdom. It must have been in the summer of 2024. Yes, because now we're in the summer of 2025. And I did some research to find out how large Hamas's army was. And it's 40,000. And at that time, the death toll in Gaza was around 40,000. So even though it was really highly unlikely that all those 40,000 were Hamas soldiers, because if they were, then Hamas would be fully vanquished. I still went ahead and I did not classify it as a genocide yet. And looking back on it, maybe I should have. Because in Bosnia or Serbia, I forget which one, so I'll bring it up in corrections. I think it was 8,000, and they labeled it a genocide that happened there. But now the numbers, for the number of Palestinians who've been killed, who've been murdered, it's up to 80,000 by some estimates. That's 40,000. Definitely a genocide. Now, even if you go by the numbers that I think are lower in estimates of 60,000, still a genocide. And still Netanyahu doesn't want to come to the table. And you know what? I don't care what Trump says. I'm tired, because when he talks about Israel and Russia, it's all talk, Trump. You're all talk. When it comes to Russia and Israel, when it comes to Putin and Netanyahu, you ain't got no stones. When it comes to those two, nothing. No sanctions, no tariffs. No soft power, no diplomatic pressure, no hardball tactics, nothing. It's embarrassing. You're the President of the United States. Arguably one of the most powerful people in the world, and you do nothing. While the most destabilizing force in the world continues a 3-year war in Ukraine, and the second most destabilizing force in the world is causing chaos in the Middle East. Now there's a genocide there and you do nothing. Unbelievable. So I don't want to hear, Netanyahu's almost close. And Putin won't stop. You know what, Trump? I ain't listening to another word you say until I see some action. You got no problem. Right now, he dropped a tweet just, I don't know how long ago, that if anyone aligns himself with BRICS, which if you don't know what BRICS is, you can look it up. It's on Google. I don't want to give you the definition of it. Essentially, it's like another economic conglomeration. Here's all you need to know for this point. He said if anyone aligns himself with BRICS, they'll be liable for another 10% tariff, or an additional 10% tariff. What's so absurd about this statement is that Russia is part of BRICS. That's the R in BRICS, is Russia. But he won't put any tariffs on Russia. So everyone, except for one of the founding members of BRICS, gets a tariff they align themselves with. That's how complicit he is with Vladimir Putin and Benjamin Netanyahu. He is complicit with 2 war criminals. Now, I don't know yet because they haven't been brought to The Hague. So I guess I'm jumping the gun there. But it doesn't look too good for Vladimir and Netanyahu. They likely will never leave their country. Because if they do, they'll probably be brought to The Hague. Oh, wait, excuse me. Apparently they could come to the United States and be fine, right, Donald? Bring them to the White House? How about the Camp David? And I'm sorry I'm bringing the heat, but somebody has to. Because there are millions dying. I told you it was going to be hot today. So yeah, I agree with the Prime Minister of Spain, Pedro Sanchez. It is a genocide. And it's really unfortunate that it's Israel. But I'm going to tell you what I said before. There is one truth above all other truths. Whatever you hate, you become. And I had mentioned this in a previous podcast, one that has not been released yet, when I was in the UK, that it looked like to me Netanyahu wanted to settle scores. He's been around for a long time. And he wasn't looking first to what was really important to the residents of Israel, which is to get the hostages back and to end this conflict. No, instead I'm going to go ahead and settle these scores and these beefs I have with these other countries in the Middle East. It's so bad in Gaza right now that people are starving. The Palestinians are starving. It's on the brink of famine. By some estimates, someone in the United Nations, who is an expert on delivering aid, said that the United States and Israel's replacement to the UN delivering aid, which is called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, he called it an abomination what's happening there. Those strong words. But when you're going ahead and mowing down innocent Palestinians who are just trying to get some food, I guess you do call it an abomination. This is what I wrote. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is doing a reprehensible job in distributing aid in Gaza. It is beyond evident that they are ill-equipped and woefully inadequate to handle and manage the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. It is plainly obvious this experiment has failed miserably, and it's time to shut it down and let the UN do what they do best. Deliver aid. I mean, I had some pretty strong words for the UN just a few moments ago. But my gosh, without the UN, with all these conflicts around the world, they do so much in regards to aid and charity. So much. And for some reason, Netanyahu won't allow them in, and the IDF gets to mow Palestinians down as they try and get food. Yeah, it's a genocide, and it has to stop. So, again, if the United States isn't going to lead in this side of the hemisphere, then who's it going to be? Well, as I mentioned to you in another podcast, I believe it was France, the United Kingdom, and Canada, and hopefully Germany's willing to join up, that they were looking to go ahead and apply sanctions on Israel if they didn't stop expanding their military operations in Gaza and not allow the UN to deliver aid. But here again, is diplomacy dying? Are they just... Hold on for a second. Are they just the leaders who can be trusted, who are wise and faithful, but they simply speak condemnations and do nothing? Because we need more than that. We're tired of just hearing condemnations. We're tired of you putting out, because here's what we're worried about. We're worried that you're just putting it out there and you think you're on the right side of history because you went ahead and put some bulletin or some declaration. But then you don't follow it up with any action. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe tomorrow they go ahead and apply sanctions on Israel. Quickly, before we leave this topic, by the way, this is going to be a long podcast. So go ahead and buckle up. We're not going to even try to stay at the hour. You're like, what about the funny stories? Well, that's what happens when I go 2 weeks without giving you a podcast. When we have all of this topic. This is just internationally. Just wait till it hit domestically. Because as you know, the big, beautiful bill passed. And as I told you before, there's nothing beautiful about this bill. And it is big in how much it adds to our debt. But I just did some research, and man, it's even worse than I think. I'm just gonna say this really quick, and then I want to put a bow tie on the whole discussion around the Middle East. But I don't think anymore any Republican can ever say that they are fiscally responsible. They are, with the passage of this bill, they are the most irresponsible, fiscally irresponsible party ever. Because of how much it adds to the debt, how the Fed's already said we're on an unsustainable path. It looks as if, and I'll get into this, but it looks as if they're trying to bankrupt us. Or they don't care that they're going to bankrupt us, because guess what? They're all cashing out. It's fantastic. By the way, it's fantastic for them, because guess what? They can go ahead and trade stocks while they're there. I follow a group called Unusual Whales on Reddit. And they do a lot of work, really good work, in reporting the amount of money these politicians make on trading stocks. Well, I mean, I guess you can't call it technically insider trading, but when you know certain provisions won't be added to a bill, or certain monies will be taken from a bill, and it's going to affect these industries, I guess that'd be really important information for your portfolios. And this goes on both sides, Republican and Democrat. So why would they care? If they're going to go ahead and bankrupt the country, they're going to be fine. They're going to be set. They won't need any of the benefits because they're going to be, they're going to be with a net worth in the millions. They make their annual salaries like $130,000 a year, and they come out all millionaires. So why would they care, that they're going to head and add all of this to the debt and leave it for us? Getting back to the Middle East. So, by the way, really quick on that, let me put a bow on that one. It always cracks me up. Again, diplomacy is dying. This is not diplomacy, but this is in the same vein. The same theme. And I know you're with me on this. The same theme, the same vein. We're going to go ahead and bring up a bill to go ahead and stop stock trading in Congress. You hear it every year. Every year, some new politician, and guess what? Never vote on it. I wonder why. You figure it out. Why are they going to vote on a bill that could potentially take millions away from them? Follow some of these. I'm telling you, you follow Unusual Whales and you follow some of these politicians in regards to their portfolios and how much money they're making and how much they're beating the market. They do better than some hedge funds. Actually, they do better than a lot of hedge funds. They do better than some of the indices on the market. How? Because they're privy. This is what we were talking about earlier. They're privy to inside information. Not what we were talking about earlier, but we've talked about in another podcast. The one that was titled, They Never Tell You Everything. You know, there's only so much information that we know. I'm sure you know that. But, you know, as you get into different circles and level of trust, you get more information. Well, that information is really important to help you decide which stocks to buy and which stocks to get rid of. Speaking of getting rid of or thinking about what to do with your portfolio, and I think I've already touched on this. I did, but I'll just touch on it again briefly. I really think Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar should seriously consider looking at some European alternatives until we actually start as a country being able to go ahead and to really guide Israel to being more of a stabilizing force and a peaceful partner, one that wants to spread peace in the region, and one that's committed to having a two-state solution. And if Israel is resistant to that, which we know Netanyahu is, then the United States applying soft power measures to get them in line with it. I'm going to be honest with you. Right now, it really seems like Netanyahu can do whatever he wants. He has a blank check. And Trump just signs it. So one way, right? One way to go ahead and to, show that you would like to see different actions within the region because, and you say, well, that's not fair. That's kind of like blackmail. No, it's not. Because if war breaks out in the region, that's going to affect business. Not to mention the deaths. Not to mention the endangerment to your citizens. So it's very important. So you can look to European alternatives. I mean, there's a lot of companies here that compete with Boeing and Lockheed Martin. I mean, I could give you the European names, but you're not going to know them. But that would be one way. Again, to show like diplomacy is not dead, to show soft power. Speaking of, to show that diplomacy is not dead, speaking of, things that should have been dead, you're like, whoa, that's really grim. Yeah, man, it's grim tales tonight. By the way, this podcast really is happening on the 7th of July. But I said the 6th because, it's the 7th in the wee hours of the morning here, Pacific Standard Time. So yeah, it's a little grim tales right now. It's like 4:30 in the morning where I'm at. And I'm still going ahead and giving you this podcast and this content. And you're like, fine, let's go grim. What should have been killed? What should have been dead? That bill That big, beautiful tax bill should have been killed. Now, we had talked about it at length, so I'm not going to go into it too much, except to say it looks like 17 million people are going to lose their insurance through Medicaid. Food stamps get cut again. Food pantries are saying we're not going to be able to meet the demand. Fantastic. As we said in another podcast, we now have policy that's promoting starvation. And again, as I said before, well, that's hyperbolic. No, it's not. Because sometimes to bring the point home, you make the absurd absurder. This is from Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina, a Republican. Listen to how strong he speaks here. What do I tell 663,000 people when President Trump breaks his promise by pushing them off Medicaid? Republicans are about to make a mistake on health care and betray a promise. And you say, whoa, that's incredible. A Republican spoke that strongly against Trump's bill? Yeah, and you know why? Because he announced his retirement, that's why. This is the problem with today's politics. No one can really speak their mind. No one can really speak to their convictions. No one can act to their convictions. No one can be bold. No one can be statesmen. Unfortunately, they're puppets most of the time. They are controlled by the amount of money that is now infiltrated and infested the political system. Anytime you hear a politician about to retire, they speak so boldly. Why is that? Because they don't have to worry about their donors anymore. They don't have to worry about how much money they need to raise to get reelected. And they don't have to worry about primary challengers. Specifically, if you're a Republican, you don't have to worry about some MAGA primary challenge anymore. So Tom Tillis spoke his mind. You know, in this modern era of politics, it is so polarized because of Citizens United and FEC and McCutcheon, which allowed so much money to flow into politics. I lived in a time where Republicans and Democrats used to work together. It is like a whole other, it's like a parallel universe. Except there are no parallel universes, it's just one universe. I'll say it again. It's like another galaxy. Far, far away. So, it's great that he said that. 17 million to get kicked off of Medicaid. But here's why I said earlier that the Republicans, for as much as so many of them tout being fiscally responsible and fiscally conscious and worried about the debt, no, you're not. A bunch of lies. Bullocks, as we say in the United Kingdom. Hogwash. Hooey. A bunch of BS. I'll just say that. I don't want to hear it anymore. I don't ever want to see Senator Ron Johnson come in again and talk about being worried about the debt. My gosh, every time he comes on, it's always, I'm worried about the debt. I'm worried about the debt. No, you're not. Because if you were worried about the debt, you would not have voted for this bill. And I can tell you right now, there is no way Ron Johnson ever would have lost his seat. Ever. He is safe there. Didn't have the spine. Do you know how much they had to increase the debt ceiling to $5 trillion to pass this bill? Those who are so debt conscious. Do you know how much it's going to add to the debt? The Congressional Budget Office is saying it's going to add $3 trillion to our debt. We've talked about the debt in this podcast. I don't have the numbers for you right now because I don't have them memorized. But you remember it had increased by like 500% over the past 30 years or something absurd like that. I can't even remember the number that the debt is at. It's astronomical. It's exorbitant. It's enormous. And yet you go ahead and you passed it, but you continue to fund these Trump tax cuts, which don't pay for themselves. The whole idea behind the Trump tax cuts is that it was going to stimulate GDP growth, increase our GDP, increase the size of the economy, and we'd have more revenue for the budget. It didn't do that. So all it's doing is taking away money that we use for other costs to the budget, specifically Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid. But I mean everything, man. Everything we pay for federally. And they don't care.